Right then, so here we are with Charlie and Grace Brown, who've lived in the Stivington area for most of their lives, and they're going to be telling us about their very early memories from the early 1940s.
Yes, away from school, I think one of my main things I remember about really be the wartime. It would be, I'd have to check really, it would be about 1945, towards the end of the war. I remember standing, because I still live in Waternewton those days, in the same row, which is right down near the mill, and I do remember standing in our door one evening because there's been a big bang. It was the doodlebug that dropped near Castor Station, and it was no doubt big news, but I do recall then, so that means I'd be about 4.5 years old, I do remember standing in the doorway and hearing plop, plop, plop in the river, which would be all the stuff that was blown up as the doodlebug landed and then deposited itself in the river. So that's about, for certain, that's one of the wartime memories. Yeah. Other than that, there isn't that much. I do recall all the aeroplanes going over and the different sounds that they had. I can recall that. And the other thing, the big thing would be that my father had a filling station in Waternewton. Don't know exactly how these things work, but it was closed down through the wartime, and no doubt it wasn't required, or the people weren't there to actually buy petrol, or they were ordered to close. I'm not quite sure. There's the smaller stations, but my father went off and worked in the quarries.
Oh yes.
But they're the two main things, considering that the war ended when I was 5 years old. It's to think in terms of wartime, that bomb dropping and the amount of airplanes that were flying over, they're the two.
So you even had a lot of airplanes flying over, even in this quiet rural area of...
Yeah. You could to get over the war, didn't it, sort of thing?
Like rationing?
Yes.
Must have gone on.
Yes, yeah.
How did that affect you? What about food?
Well,
do you remember anything about what you ate at the time?
I really can't remember thinking I was hungry or, going without or anything. Whether it's just how I can't really remember too much about it, but my dad had an allotment. My granddad had pigs, which he fed with this mashed potato. I can smell it. Everything I think I could smell it in this big, like, witch's cauldron. We used to call it witch's cauldron. These mashed potatoes with this sort of powdery meal mixed in. Yeah. So, of course, these pigs were killed when they were ready, and Granddad used to have them on like a pantry, hanging these sides of pigs on them. And we used to make sausages and these chitlings and lots of lovely bacon. So that was one thing. And we had chickens for eggs and also for eating the chickens, and rabbits we had as pets, eating them as pets and then sort of eat them. Like there we are. That's what happened. And Dad always had plenty. And also Dad worked at the Swan Hill nurseries. I can remember going into those big, huge greenhouses full of tomatoes. A lovely smell, because then I suppose you got quite a few tomatoes from there. So I can remember eating tomatoes.
So it sounds like one of the advantages of living in the countryside over being in the town is all the vegetables and the chickens and rabbits.
Just go across to Howard's shop.
You just reminded me about Harold, when my father... I'm not quite sure what connection Father had with the Home Guard, but I do remember him saying that how impressed he was with the way that Harold Wingrove performed in Home Guard. So I'm not quite sure what he meant by that, but it must have stuck in his mind to relate the tale that Harold really... I think what he's saying was he really put his heart and soul into it, I think.
Yeah, my dad was in... what they called the Observers, and so was my granddad, who was at Wittering, who was dressed up in his nice uniform, with a very hat and a lovely uniform, I remember. And he had these cards with pictures of aircraft on, mostly in silhouette, so you couldn't really see any detail except just the silhouette of it. And my brother and I used to, we sort of argued whose turn it was to hold them up and show Dad. So Dad would look at the picture and the name was on the back. So he'd look at the picture and tell you what it was, and so he'd learn all about this. So I think he was on this lookout for somewhere. I don't know where they used to go. As I say, I'll remember some things, but it's a bit vague.
Observer Corps, I suppose, yes.
Yeah, Observer Corps, yeah.
Yes. There must have been a local place to Wansford.
Yeah, I'm not sure where, but...
No doubt someone was there with him as well, so...
We've covered a lot of our
subjects.
Yes.
The actual evacuees. Do you remember anything about them?
Oh yes, we it just so happened that the house we're in at the moment, we lived further along the road at this time, that Mrs.
Mary Park.
lived here, and she was evacuee from London. She came up to Old Walton. She must have married a local lad, Jim Parker, which I think he was from Chesterton. Certainly they're all around Chesterton and Old Walton. She lived here in this house, and they had 4 children who went to Steventon School.
What was her name before she was married?
No,
No, I don't think we would know. Mary Parker, no. Yes.